Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. John Michael Salvato, and you're watching The Brew, our weekly television program for queer pagan spirituality and news, insight, views. Kind of think of it as a talk show like The View or The Talk, only where our focus is a little bit more esoteric and probably a lot more, let's say, irreverent. So with me today on the show, I'm really pleased to have a couple guests with us, and we finally have some of that female energy on the panel today with us. We've got Katrina Roche in California, in Marin County, and then we have Richard Levy, who many of you remember from some of our previous shows and from the Inner Alchemy program as well. So welcome, you guys. I'll go ahead and as we come up on the screen, we were, before the show started, we were talking about how I think the master microphone or the owner of the show, however you want to look at it, has a duplex setting that the browser is not automatically turning off. So we apologize in advance that it may take a second or two for you guys to get clear audio footage when somebody else comes on. But I want to welcome everybody who's here. Tanisha, it's fantastic to see you, my friend. My travel business partner, Tanisha Tony Burke, is joining us today. And we've got Lisa Ben-Sur, we've got Martha Ferrioli, I see Dominic, I see Manu Corvus, let's see, I think there's Arthur. I almost feel like I'm on Romper Room with jumping on here, and I see Susie and I see Johnny and my little Romper Stomper Bomper Boo thing. So today on our show, we're going to talk about something that I think might be of interest, and I think might be of value to members of the queer pagan community, and that is the idea of witchsplaining. And many of you have probably heard this conversation or this term used in a different setting where it was mansplaining. And so witchsplaining is basically the same thing. It's when someone who is part of a particular tradition, somewhat arrogantly assumes that they need to or have the right to or are compelled to, whatever, to correct somebody who is a practitioner in another tradition, in their tradition, somebody that they really don't have a keen enough sense of where that person's coming from, because it's more about sort of that arrogant need to tell them that they're wrong. And the reason that there are two reasons I brought this up for today's show. The first reason is that I was reading an article by Matt Oren, who is my current pagan blog man crush of the month, and he wrote this exceptional blog on witchsplaining. And simultaneous to reading that article, there was somebody who was interacting with a friend of mine. Actually, I think it was with Richard, who was sort of denigrating others on the path because of their let's say more superficial approach to the craft, or maybe their lack of experience, or their new aginess, or however we want to call it. So I want to own this first, and I want to say that there have been times that I have caught myself and times that I haven't caught myself, but that didn't change the fact that I was doing it when I was witchsplaining. There have been times when, in an effort to try and help somebody further their practice, I wasn't mindful and I wasn't compassionate and kind enough, partially because of the autism, but partially just because of a lack of mindfulness, that person might take what I'm saying offensively, that they may not be open to hearing someone else's perspective. And so today we want to kind of talk about whether it's possible, and I believe that it is, for us to be able to come from a place of respectfulness for one another's autonomy, their sovereignty, as I like to call it, And while being respectful, to not necessarily have to compromise our own tradition, our own belief, our own spiritual path. See, if somebody wants to come out and super glue a crystal on top of their head and put feathers coming out of their ears and tassels on their nipples, if that brings them closer to realization on their spiritual journey, I don't care. I might think it's absolutely frigging nuts, but it's not my place to say you can't do that if it brings you where you're going. So if somebody wants to say that witchcraft is absolutely a psychological, a science, a mind science, a psychology, is all controlled by thought, then they have the right to do that. And they actually, in that particular case, have some foundation for that. We do have the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. We do have the this story that the early 20th century Kabbalion that talks about mentalism and how that's the foundation of manifestation. We've talked about that in the Inner Alchemy program. But if somebody else wants to come along and say, no, it's mystical, magical, we don't know what it is, they have the right to do that as well. And that doesn't compromise who and what I am. So I think, and I'll start us off by saying, I have a sense that in our culture today that's so divisive because of all things orange, that is so divided in terms of ideology, in terms of a political stance, in terms of practice, that we become so desperate, so insecure about who we are that we need validation. And in that search for validation, we're putting other people down. And I don't think that's how community is built. So let me bring our guests on and let me figure out how to. I have got to put my glasses on. Katrina said that it's really frustrating to see the glare on my glasses, but I can't see the friggin' screen. So this old man's going to have his glasses on for now. So guys, jump in and we'll start with Katrina, and I'll mute the two of us out. But Katrina, in your tradition, and feel free to share a little bit about what that tradition is. And while Katrina's sharing, if you guys have any comments you want to share, if you have any questions you want to ask about witchsplaining and about your experience of, have you had people that have tried to tell you that your experience isn't valid or that you don't have a right to practice the way that you practice? Katrina, go ahead and jump in first.
Okay, sure. Well, my background is pretty eclectic. I'd say I draw from many different places and synthesize really what I found of value along the way. But I did have a Wiccan mentors early on, and in my 20s, and then I've also drawn from other spiritual traditions, Tibetan Buddhism, which certainly includes spiritual. It's a spiritual psychology, if you will, and just different, also earth-based traditions, Native American traditions. So I very much am tapped into the earth energies, the elemental energies, earth, wind, fire, etc. And so I draw from a lot of different places. And my feeling is that regardless of what, like you, I feel like everybody has the right to, and is a birthright to traverse their path the way that it's unfolding for them. And everyone also is at different levels of awareness, awakening, stepping into understanding about what their craft, and I'd say their craft, not just the craft, but theirs. Everybody's at a different point of stepping into that and embodying it and then expressing it, and also recognizing it and embodying it and expressing it are cycles of growth in my experience. So, some people are just starting out, just awakening to and connecting to this element of life and this aspect of what's potentially their practice. And others are further along the way. And thank goodness, that we that's the way it is, because, there's always someone further along the path, in my experience, who can mentor me to take my next steps. So those are my thoughts initially.
Thanks. And Richard, bring some of that that experience and wisdom that you've got in working with some amazing organizations that have done frankly done a great deal of or brought a great deal of benefit to the pagan community, and understanding some of the older traditions, and understanding in your own work the value of sacred stories and mythos. And you're familiar with the impetus that kind of led to saying, hey, maybe we need to talk about this being able to bring respect while at the same time not compromising who we are. Because I think that the person that we had that conversation with, I think they genuinely wanted to protect the integrity of the craft and the integrity of the magical tradition. But for whatever reason, was unable to kind of do that in a way that was respectful to others. So go ahead and weigh in.
I think it's quite interesting, because one of the things I usually think about and talk about with people is that we don't actually have a common vocabulary. We kind of have to borrow from different things in order to actually kind of get a point across. So a lot can get lost in translation, which therefore requires patience and very good listening skills. And it was interesting because what you were saying about mentalism and psychology before, it was interesting that my vocabulary on that, the reason I would have been a bit uncomfortable in the past myself with certain psychological models, is because actually the things you've said I wouldn't actually classify as psychology, even though they're in the mental sphere. And that's because I look more at, when people talk about psychology, they usually just, if I'm honest, I find people will just throw in Carl Jung, throw in words like archetypes and shadow. But what modern psychology, what's happened over time, and it's one of the things I think is why I get a bit awkward about it, is, and something I disagree with, is the disconnection it has made between consciousness being just psychological and not physical, and things like that, which we can see obviously through certain stories, that there's more of a connection and a relationship. And obviously when psychology started, psychologists were much more into philosophy and magic and things of that nature, Carl Jung particularly. So it's more where it's sort of come out from today. I was in a group once where someone did say to me, and I wasn't offended at the time, I was more bemused, but because I didn't believe that all spirits were just thought forms, basically. She basically said that I was, oh, that's all they are, and if you believe anything else, you're playing with yourself, which I was found ironic, because I thought, well, literally the opposite is true. If I believed they were in my mind, then I would be playing with myself, because it's just my mind. But I don't mind that she felt that way, if I'm honest. I do think she could have approached it more respectfully. And I do think that there is a interesting relationship here between, I feel that people can be more respectful and make an effort to be respectful, as much as I think people can also make an effort not to be too sensitive and to try and engage with someone, and also to be wrong, to make mistakes, to learn and to grow. And the thing is, within magic particularly, it doesn't matter how old someone is, because some people at a very young age it's just not linear. They're just really strongly connected to something. It all comes through for them, and they'll be able to teach someone. And of course, if you're teaching someone yourselves, I mean, I haven't myself, but from my understanding of people who have, is that basically the master will always be not replaced, that's the wrong word, but surpassed by their students. That's the point. You pass it on and it goes stronger each time. So I do think that it's something we need to be aware of, like I say, because of the vocabulary elements. We need to be more respectful, but we equally need to make an effort to understand our language and what we mean, and also not be at times too sensitive. Because I do think that people's right to believe is just as important as someone's right to challenge, if they're going to be out there with their opinion, if they're going to talk about their opinion. So yeah.
That's excellent. I really want to hone in on something and want to thank you because over the last couple of weeks, one example of precisely what you were talking about that happened was you shared with me something that I'd said on a previous broadcast that was uncomfortable for you and that you could see as being hurtful to others and maybe even being taken completely in the wrong way. Although there was, it wasn't just a matter of somebody taking it the wrong way. It was my communication was not mindful or sensitive, wasn't compassion, wasn't rooted in compassion in the simplest of terms. In the way that I expressed something, and then off the top of my head, I can't even remember what it was because when you said it to me, it clicked, and I very quickly owned that and said, "Aha, that's true," and I need to be more aware of that. And part of my magical process, personal development process, is to say, okay, let's release that. Let's let this out of my experience because there had to be a reason I was doing that. There had to be something, a point of insecurity, a point of fear, a point of hurt that I needed to be able to release that. And for me, nothing hits that nail on the head more powerfully than one of our former co-hosts who I still to this day adore. I still to this day respect his path. But the entire struggle between him and the rest of the community here was because he was, I believe, trying to express that from his perspective and in his tradition, this is how it's taught. You don't charge for services. You don't charge for anything spiritual. And I believe that somewhere deep down, there was room in his heart for others to do so, but he was feeling like others saying, well, there's no reason for me not to charge. There may not be any reason for me not to charge for my services. And that doesn't negate your saying that there is no room for you to be able to charge in your tradition. And that's where I think some of this difficulty comes in, is that we think that things are mutually exclusive. As you said, psychology. When I'm Jungian in my training, my master's in psychology was very heavily Jungian influenced, and so there's a synergy there between magic and mind, between magic and psychology. But I absolutely understand those who might not feel that way, because when I read the writings of, to put it in the simplest term, Freud, I think he's an absolute nut job, and it's the furthest thing from magic. It's almost the antithesis of magic, to read how he perceives the world and brings his baggage to the table and disguises it as science. So I thank you for that, because that was one of the things I think we can do. Katrina, I'm gonna go to you and ask you, as well as those who are watching. Feel free to jump in, guys. What do you think might be one of the ways that we can create space in our whether it's our language or whether it's our interactions with other people, to make it safe for people to be able to express themselves? We're part of a minority community as it is, and we're a minority within the minority. And some of us are even some of the trans folks who are practitioners are minorities and minorities and minorities. And it just hurts me. Someone said, why are you continuing to bring this topic up in various ways on the show? Why don't you just move on? And I want to move on, but we can't move on, in my opinion, until there's room in our hearts for everybody, and a place at the table for everybody. And I don't care how cheesy that sounds. I just don't want to be in a community where people are turned away from the table. I'll be feeding them under the table if that's the rules, because it just doesn't work for me. So what do you think, Katrina, some of the things that we can do to kind of bridge that marginalization, and also to own it in ourselves when we do the same thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, what strikes me with what you were just saying is, really that's the practice of embodying the unconditional heart, is to look at, and we all have ways in which we close the circle. We don't, it's not open and inclusive. We all have that. So that's an opportunity for our own growth, to be mindful of where do I shut down, exclude, move into fear of the other, whoever the other is, and choose to relax and open our hearts. Because love is universal, that every living being on the planet has that within themselves. They may not be accessing it, they may not be living from it, they may be very disconnected from it, but that is at the core what life is. And so everybody has that seed within their own being. And so I think, it starts inside me to notice, where do I embrace and open and allow and welcome, and where do I energetically cut that off or restrict it in some way. And then also, in terms of interacting with people, it's finding what some people refer to as nonviolent ways to communicate, which means that we are listening, and listening to hear, not listening to respond. So I think that makes a big difference too, because when we're able to listen to hear, the other person feels that we are approaching them with compassion. Yeah. And so I think those are the things that make the difference.
Absolutely. And Richard, comments on not only ways that you see us being able to move forward, but some of the incredible observations that you shared with me that in a loving way chastised me and brought to my awareness the things that were going on. And you've certainly been around these online communities longer than a lot of people. So I think you bring a great deal more experience, hands-on experience, and have an incredible gentle heart that just endears me to you, but also earns a great deal of respect. So go ahead and jump in, but give me 1 second to mute my mic.
So I think one of the first things I would say is actually what you did, which was being able to own it, because I've done it myself plenty of times, and I probably will again. We all make these mistakes, and I think it's that thing of, again, it takes a long time to get to that point of communication. But again, the one thing I'm going to have to plug for it is stories again, because they also give examples, and we all have them. So if I was to talk very briefly about in the New Testament, there is a part where I forget who it is, but someone encounters an angel. The angel gives him a scroll. He eats the scroll. And I can't remember the exact quote, but the reason I mention this one is because, of course, it's that multidimensional element. On a magical level, he's encountering a power in this angel. On a psychological level, his imagination processes this as a way of communicating, because magically, when you're using your imagination, it's to communicate. So he can identify this as an angel, and the scroll is obviously not a scroll, it's power that he has to take within himself that will reveal itself in time. But then it hits him physically because he actually gets a stomachache from it. And it's that thing of, if I start explaining myself like that to someone, then they start to say, oh, I see, yeah, it affects, as above, so below, it affects you on each level. On every level. It's multidimensional, which is why it is important, because we all come from it then from a different angle. Some traditions encourage work from the inner space and go from there. Some people go, no, I'd rather use an outer space. I'd rather learn from nature and in time you obviously reflect it within, and it's just a different way of doing it. I think that if we're going to move forward with it, it is just a case of owning your own shit. We're all going to make mistakes. We're going to keep making mistakes because we're human. I think one of my favourite images that I once saw was a tree of life with the fool at Keter at the bottom, and Malkut is ever no sorry Keter's at the top and Malkut at the bottom, and it's because the fool's there in both places, because when the magician gets to that point, he's not just the fool anymore. When he gets to the top, he's the realised fool. It's about knowing that we're fools, because ultimately we can only ever know like 1% of magic in a lifetime. It's too big. We then transcend and go beyond that. But there's a level of it that's humility. There's a level of it that's also learning. Sometimes we are going to end up arguing, and some people are we're all human. We're going to some people have big egos. There's not a lot we can do until they either get past them or they never do. But also I think owning your identity if you're a practitioner. And if you're not a practitioner and you're an armchair magician, for example, it's fine if that's what you're happy with. But you do have to own the fact that that's your thing. You study it, you don't practice it. And for better or worse, there's a line there. Because I've read it myself. You'll come across a book written by someone who only studies it, and the first few chapters will be fantastic. And then suddenly it becomes a dud because they start to embellish and change things. But without the practice, you can't give the right level of insight. And it's fine if that's not what you want to do, but just own where you are as best you can. Because the other thing is, you're going to get to a point where you'll be an elder in what you do. And I've met many elders who will then say to me, do you know what, I've been told I have to start all over again. I'm not allowed to practice these specific practices because they want me to learn it in a new way. That's all we're ever doing. We're climbing up that ladder and realising there's only more rungs at the end of the day. And I think if it's just about understanding we're only ever just becoming, then you can move forward, but you're going to also make mistakes, and you're going to have to forgive yourself and others along the way. I don't think there's any way around.
Awesome. Again, guys, I really appreciate this. And for those that are watching live and those that are watching on the rebroadcast, I hope that this kind of inspires conversation, because the purpose of this show ultimately was to create a dialogue. It wasn't to, for me and whomever the guests were that week to sort of preach to you or teach some sort of dogma or doctrine. It's to share just our perspectives and hopefully give you something to use as a springboard. And over the next couple months, I'm pretty excited about the fact that we're going to be sharing some opportunities for folks to be able to come together. We may do this first in the United States and then begin to expand that to other venues in other countries. But there'll be, like weekends or week-long travel opportunities for us to come together and not sit at the feet of a teacher, but to have various teachers sharing their perspectives, sharing their experiences, and really kind of all of us get our hands dirty in working toward what we're calling in Inner Alchemy the collective. A collective that's not, I'm going to sound like the geek that I am, but that's not Borg-like in its structure, but something that transcends even that sense of integration, that sense of the common good, and really says, hey, I'm okay. I can speak only for myself and say I'm okay with people having different traditions, because those different traditions brought me to where I am today. I grew up in a hereditary Italian folk magic and in an ancient tradition with where everything was encapsulated in the family. Even our grand coven was a grand coven made up of other portions of our family in an ever widening concentric circles. And that's beautiful, and that's fine. And some of my family will always be the only thing for them. For me, I wasn't satisfied with just status quo, and so I'm always digging. I'm always looking at other traditions. I'm intrigued and fed by those other traditions, and it doesn't mean that everything that comes along resonates with me. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Witchcraft as a religion doesn't resonate with me at all, but it's something that I have great respect for because I've seen it firsthand in the lives of so many people, allow them to do tremendous things. The same with other approaches, and the radical fairy movement is something that I think is just really deserves a great deal of respect for the lives that it saved within the LGBT community, especially within the men's community, especially for when our community was being decimated by the pandemic. But it's just something that doesn't resonate with me. I have had the pleasure of joining with some of my Fae brothers for different gatherings and events, and they were beautiful, but they weren't my tradition. And you know what? When we go to places that aren't our tradition, it doesn't kill us. It doesn't take away from your tradition. It only enriches it. It only deepens that. So I want to thank both Katrina and Richard for being here today. Want to thank you guys for tuning in and encourage you to join the conversation. If you'd like to be on one of these panels and be a guest live on camera, we would absolutely love that. If there's a topic that you want to see covered, let us know. But even right now, wherever you happen to be, if you want to join this conversation, if there's something you want to share, put it in the comments below, and we'll be sure to keep this conversation going. We do try to keep these conversations to 30 minutes so that folks can sneak them in on their lunch break on the West Coast, and can get them in the middle of the afternoon here. And for Richard and our friends that are watching from the other side of the pond, we really appreciate you taking time out of your evening at the end of what might be a work day for a lot of people to be with us and share the kind of insights that we heard today. But let's keep this conversation going, because building community for me is the second step in growing our practice. We first have to build from the inside. In my opinion, we have to come to terms with reclaiming our power. And then once we reclaim our power and realize that no one can take that away from us, then it's easy to say, I want to celebrate your reclamation of power and your reclamation of power, and become like the witchy version of Oprah and say, you're getting a car and you're getting a car, you're getting your power, you're getting your power, and every single one of you are getting your power as well. So while it may make us choke on the volume here for a minute, I want to open things up. Thank you, both of you guys. I really appreciate it. If you have any closing comments, I'm going to go. We'll start with Richard and then Katrina, and then I'll wish everybody well.
Okay, last comment, I suppose. I'll just keep it simple, and that is, with the people who actually are potentially being the difficult ones, we also have to try not to go straight for an offensive defense. Obviously a troll's a troll, that sort of thing you cast your son on and turn him to stone. But when it's someone who seemingly is overly defensive and offensive, it is worth trying to see if you can calm it first before it goes straight into calling. That I've come across all these terms lately, from witchsplaining to gatekeeping and all this stuff. Try and develop an actual dialogue with them if you can, and then you're doing the right thing. And then from there, if you can't, you can't, and you can always do the blocking and go from there.
Okay. Katrina.
Yeah, that's really good. I don't really have anything additional to add at the moment, other than it's an ongoing journey, and the beauty of it is that if you're open, then you are constantly learning and growing and taking nourishment from wherever it's coming. So I appreciate this opportunity to be with you guys today. Thank you.
Oh, we're glad to have both of you. And guys, at the end of every program, I say the same thing. And someone asked me last week, well, why do you say the same thing? And it's because I think it's what we need to hear. It's what I need to hear. And so many people that I know, and that is that, Eckhart Tolle said something once that if we cultivate the quality of our consciousness, that's going to reflect in our experiences. And so if that's true, then by the best way to cultivate a higher quality consciousness is to return to the present moment, to be grateful for the things that you've got, to recognize that if you can't be grateful with what you have now, there's absolutely no reason to think that you're going to be any happier with more. And to always, above everything else, remember that on this journey, that is a series of extraordinary moments, the best is yet to come. We'll look forward to seeing you guys soon, and look forward to your comments afterwards. Thanks, everybody. Love ya. Bye.